Chapter 2 1915 The Dawn of the Industrial War. The global conflict was producing new methods of warfare, a lack of anything more than meager and narrow victories by all sides, acquired by outdated tactics, necessitated newer strategies and equipment. On the Western Front, trench warfare was the main method by which Allied and Central forces attempted to capture and defend land. Germany quickly saw the potential of rapid-firing machine guns and employed them throughout their trenches. Allied forces were slower in adopting the weapon, but after witnessing the devastation it had caused to their own forces, they began adding the machine gun to their arsenal. Germany utilized the power of the U-boat and installed a blockade in around the British Isles to stop supply vessels from reaching British ports. This obstacle to vital cargo was a direct and efficient counter-response to the North Sea blockade. The first ever bombing raid in Britain occurred on the 19th of January, carried out by the two German Zeppelins, giant airships filled with hydrogen. The Zeppelins dropped a number of bombs on Great Yarmouth, Sheringham and King's Lynn, which resulted in 4 civilian deaths and heavy destructions to buildings. On the 23rd of January, Britain intercepted German transmissions detailing plans of a naval sortie near Dogger Bank in the North Sea. The British Navy was ordered to intercept and repel the German squadron. The Battle of Dogger Bank commenced on the 24th, which resulted in the loss of a German battleship and damage to the squadron. The British fleet was successful in repelling the German squadron but not in sinking it. On the 28th, German and Ottoman forces began an assault on the British-held Suez Canal in an attempt to gain control of another significant shipping route. But by February 3rd, the British had quashed the assault. The German and Ottoman forces sustained a large number of casualties. On the Eastern Front, German forces began using chemical weapons, a new device of death designed to bring a more resolute and quick ending to battles. The Germans unleashed xyllyl bromide on the Russian forces at the Battle of Bolimo, but the attack backfired when the wind blew the chemical back over the German lines. Luckily for the German forces, a combination of cold weather and the primitive concentration of the deadly mist prevented the xyllyl bromide from doing too much harm. In reaction to the failed chemical assault, the Germans called off the attack. The Battle of Bolimo preluded the more successful German assault that was launched on February the 7th, which became known as the Second Battle of the Masurian Lake. Field Marshal von Hindenburg led the Central Forces in an attack which wiped out over 200,000 Russian soldiers and secured German victory. February 19th saw the arrival of Allied warships at the Dardanelles, with ambitions to reopen the strait and attack the Turkish capital, Constantinople, modern Istanbul. It was hoped that in witnessing the true might of the Allied navy, Turkey would be crushed and surrender. It would have been a heavy blow to the Central Powers. With Turkey out of the war, the Allies could reopen the Dardanelles, the vital shipping route that connected Europe to Asia. However, large-scale damage to ships from mines and shore defenses scuppered the Allied efforts. The attack was halted. Between the 10th and 30th of March on the Western Front, the three-day Battle of Neuve Chapelle took place, carried out by British and Indian forces in an attempt to breach German lines. It was hoped that a surge for the Aubers Ridge behind the German front would compromise the road and rail networks that fed the German lines. Though counted as a tactical victory of the British, German defences ultimately subdued the surge. Russia gained a hefty victory at the expense of Austro-Hungarian forces. During the siege of Przemysl on March 22nd, following a 133-day siege, the longest of the entire war, casualties were high on both sides, but its leaders lauded the clear Russian victory. Russia had faced a number of heavy defeats up that point. Meanwhile, the total number of casualties suffered by Austria-Hungary since the war started was over 2 million. On the April 22nd, during the Second Battle of Ypres, the Germans attacked Allied forces using chlorine gas, which choked over 7,000 soldiers, 350 of whom died from their injuries. The gas attack took the Allies by surprise. A new weapon had found its place on the battlefield. By the end of the battle, the town had been devastated by artillery bombardments. Both sides suffered heavy losses, but the majority was firmly on the Allied side, with over 80,000 lost. There were no clear victors. The Ottoman Empire began the annexation of up to 1 million Armenians from its Turkish regions, leading to the Armenian Genocide. The Armenians had suffered long and terrible persecution and were viewed by the Young Turks of Ottoman Empire as a people of differing religious and political allegiances. The able-bodied Armenian men were subjected to conscription, hard labor, and murder. The women, children, and elders were driven into the Syrian desert without food or water and left to die. The genocide prompted outrage from the Allies, who declared the annexation a crime against humanity. On April 25th, a huge Allied force consisting of English, French, and Indian troops as well as ANZAC Australian and New Zealand Army corps landed in Gallipoli. The objective was to take out the heavy defences that lined the Dardanelles so that Allied ships could reach Constantinople and blow it apart. It was believed that the assault would be a quick win for the Allies, but the Turks were prepared and had amassed a virtually impenetrable defense force. When the Allies landed on the Gallipoli Peninsula, they were met with extreme force and were pinned on the beach for over 24 hours. The water that lapped the beaches ran red with Allied blood. Meanwhile, the Anzac forces landed on the wrong beach, having lost their bearings in the dark, and faced an impossible climb up treacherous cliffs, facing the onslaught of Turkish forces. The Eastern Front was failing to the Central Powers. On May 1st, the Germans embarked on the Gorlice-Tarnow offensive, an assault into Russian lines to alleviate the pressure of Russian advancements to Austro-Hungarian forces. It won a spectacular victory for the Central Powers, who were able to push back the Russian armies and regain control of Przemysl. On the May 7th, German U-boat SMU-20 torpedoed the British ocean liner the RMS Lusitania off the Irish coast. The liner went down with over 1,100 souls, sparing 764. The liner had been carrying American and European passengers from New York to Liverpool. It had also been hauling a heavy load of ammunition and supplies for British forces. The Germans reasoned that such cargo constituted the sinking, but Allied and US governments denounced it as an attack on civilians. The sinking quickly became an iconic moment of the war, signaling a public shift away from American neutrality. On the Western Front, May 9th, Allied forces began the Second Battle of Artois against the Central Powers. It was a close-day offensive for the Allies, who lost over 130,000 men. The advance failed, with the Allies capturing barely more than a mile of land. The German forces stood strong. On May 23rd, Italy betrayed its declaration of neutrality and joined the Allies after assurance that it would receive support in acquiring land from Austria-Hungary. She began her first major offensive against Austria-Hungary in the First Battle of Isonzo along the Italian frontier. Though the Italians outnumbered the Austro-Hungarian forces significantly, the long uphill charge required to reach the enemy lines gave the Central Powers an advantage, and they were able to hold their position. That same day, Germany introduced a new weapon into the fray, the Fokker in Decker, a monoplane with the first mounted machine gun that synchronized with the aircraft's propeller, giving it the capability to shoot through the propeller without hitting it. This drastically shifted the Germans' aerial advantage. Between July and August, the Fokker monoplane had secured air superiority for the Germans above the Western Front. It was not until 1916, when Allied forces introduced aircraft with similar synchronized firepower, that the balance of power was shifted. In July, the Russians commenced their huge withdrawal from the Galicia-Poland salient on the Eastern Front, allowing Central Powers to make large gains, including occupying Warsaw and Ivangorod on August 5th. The Great Russian Retreat lasted until September, when Russia took advantage of the ailing, battle-worn Austro-German forces and stopped their advance. The August offensive took place between the 6th through the 29th. Allies supplied reinforcements to their forces on the Gallipoli Peninsula in a final attempt to achieve their objective against the Ottoman Empire. The conflict had been long and costly for both sides. Conditions were terrible and losses were high, but the Allies failed to take any significant ground. After another passenger liner, the SS Arabic, was torpedoed by a German U-boat not far from the reach of the Lusitania. The United States demanded that the German U-boat blockade be lifted for civilian vessels. Germany agreed to loosen its U-boat operations in the Atlantic. On September 8, following the Russian retreat from Galicia and Poland, Tsar Nicholas II took control of Russian operations and dismissed Grand Duke Nikolai as commander-in-chief. Towards the end of September, the Allied forces on the Western Front mounted a huge campaign in order to seize land from Central Powers in France and Belgium. The first was the Third Battle of Artois on the 25th, a French attempt following heavy artillery bombardment to push into enemy lines. The French managed some progress in breaching the German first line and captured the Sauches village, but they failed to penetrate the German second line and were halted. In the Battle of Loos, the British launched their largest offensive of the year. They utilized poison gas and tried to push back the German line, but failed to make significant headway and suffered heavy losses despite outnumbering the German forces. The French carried out the final offensive at the Second Battle of Champagne. Initially, they made limited gains and captured a few thousand German troops, but they ran low on ammunition. The Germans then staged a counter-attack and pushed back the French forces. The offensive was called off until more ammunition could be sent to the front. The German forces suffered nearly 150,000 losses. The Allies sustained over 200,000. In October, Bulgaria allied with the Central Powers and declared war on Serbia. In response, the Allies declared war on Bulgaria and quickly deployed forces in Salonika, Greece, much to the dismay of the Greek government. The Allies hoped that they could deliver support to Serbia before a main offensive by the Central Powers could begin. However, the Central Powers, with their new Bulgarian allies, invaded Serbia and overtook it in a mere 2 months. By the 27th of November, the Serbian army had been overrun. It had retreated to the Adriatic Sea, where the few who made it were evacuated by Allied fleets. Serbia suffered the loss of over a third of its entire army. When winter came, Central Powers rejoiced over its highly successful year. It had held off major offensives on the Western Front and gained superiority in the air. They had made significant gains on the Eastern Front against Russia, and they had defeated Serbia. Yet it had been a very deadly year for both sides, and there was no end in sight. There had been major technological breakthroughs in the air, on the sea, and in the field of battle. U-boats had checkmated the British naval blockade. German aircraft fitted with synchronized machine guns were the scourge of the skies, and poison gas had proven to be more deadly than effective. Advances in intelligence gave both sides hitherto impossible advantages, and though in its infancy new methods of reconnaissance and interception of enemy communications were to totally transform modern warfare forever.